Okay, there we go. Alrighty, so let's get going. Okay, so where were we? Okay, yes, I guess we ended off last. Okay, I guess, sorry, one thing, I will send an email out to this effect in a second. All right, so I will send which is why I don't do them on Thursday, have school all day Thursday. So instead of doing my office hours tomorrow, I'm going to do them on Thursday. So Thursday I will be here basically all day, from like 9:30 in the morning till about 3:30 in the afternoon in my office and available. So Thursday would be a good day to come in if you want to review midterm number 2. I could also make probably a little bit of time tomorrow morning from like 9:30 till about noon if you want to come in. But yeah, I won't be here in the afternoon because I have to run off to Williger for a doctor's appointment, and then I don't have time to make it all the way back here in a way that kind of makes sense. So Thursday, so that's R, right? Thursday. If you want to come in and see your midterm, and again, I will send an email out to that effect after class, so don't worry about forgetting. But yeah, I won't be here the whole day tomorrow like I usually am on Tuesdays. So if you want to see your midterm, you want to go over the answers, absolutely fine. Thursday's your day. Friday afternoon I can do as well. So just let me know what works. Or come on by. You don't need an appointment on Thursday to come by. But I forgot about my doctor's appointment until my phone reminded me this morning. Okay, so we ended off last time, right? We were talking about, family and the functionalist vision of the family, right? Which is that family, if we look at all the other social institutions, family is at the center, right? And then you've got other social institutions that branch off from family, but family is the core of society in the kind of functionalist view, because it's that primary place where you are socialized, where you learn everything that you need to know. And basically, right, typically the nuclear family, so what we have in modernity, which is really a creation of the Industrial Revolution, right, so when people moved off the family farms and the plots of land that they've been farming as a family for centuries into the cities, right, they all move into apartments where it's like mom, dad, and kids. So that's, the nuclear family, that's been typical since the Industrial Revolution, at least in the West. And it is based on marriage, typically. And marriage being, right, our socially approved, presumably long-term sexual and economic union. And historically, right, now this is obviously changing now, between a man and a woman with reciprocal rights and obligations between spouses and from the parents to any children that happen to come out of that unit. And then we basically said they can be expanded, right? Typically our nuclear family is pretty small, right? Mom, dad, biologically related kids, but it can be expanded either horizontally, by adding spouses, typically women, right? More spouses and then more kids from each spouse, or vertically, right? Extended family vertically by adding multiple generations. So if grandpa moves in with you, you've expanded the family vertically. If your probably dad marries a second wife, not after divorcing the first one, but if he has 2 wives concurrently, then you're in polygamy and you're in a horizontal expansion of the family. Okay, so some people have noted that the nuclear family is a bit of a historical aberration. That, really, prior to industrialization, it was much more typical to live in kind of the nuclear family. The extended family, right? The extended family unit with multiple generations kind of either cohabiting or living in very close proximity to each other, especially since there wasn't a medical care system. Elderly relatives and children had to be cared for in the home, right? So multiple generations were involved in that until the Industrial Revolution, when that kind of changes. But then, it has its sort of heyday. The nuclear family probably peaks in about the 1950s, right? So the peak is the 1950s. 1950s are sometimes called the golden era of marriage or the golden age of marriage. After which, basically we start to see the nuclear family, at least in the West, kind of start to fall apart, right? So, I mean, you get decreases in the marriage rate. It kind of peaks in the early 1960s, the marriage rate per 1,000 people, after which point it declines kind of gradually. And today it's at its lowest point since we've been keeping records, where basically the only time that's been as low is the Great Depression, when no one was getting married because nobody had any resources and any money. But today's kind of marriage rates are lower than they were during the Great Depression. We've also had a slow rise in the divorce rate. I mean, it's sort of, through the 1960s, we had short peaks. We have a bit of a spike in 1968. When in Canada, when the Divorce Act is passed by the federal government, that makes it possible for a couple to divorce without proving that one party was adulterous or has been committing acts of cruelty to the other after a 3-year separation. And then in 1986, I believe, you have an amendment to the Divorce Act which allows no-fault divorce. So after a 1-year period of separation, you can divorce for any reason. So the number of divorces kind of rises through the 1960s, peaks up in the 80s, and then has been on a kind of slow decline since then. It's declining now, but it's declining principally because fewer people are getting married, right? So fewer people getting married means less divorce. More people are cohabiting, but we don't typically count when they break up in the same way as we count divorce. Okay, the other thing that's gone along with this is a decline in what's called the total fertility rate. Often you see demographers just use the 3-letter acronym TFR. So the total fertility rate is the number of children typically that the typical woman will have in her lifetime, right? So that's, if you kind of average out all women, you get the total and how many children they have in the fertile period, which is ages roughly 15 to about 44. Ages roughly 15 to 44 is the period where women typically can have children. Outside of those ranges, typically not, and especially towards the upper end of that range, it gets much more difficult. So TFR is children per woman in that fertile range, 15 to 44. And what we've seen basically, since roughly when fertility peaks is roughly around here, which is right around 1963, where children per woman was about 3.8. So 3.8 children per woman about there. And it has declined since then pretty steadily. And last time I saw Canada's numbers, we were now at 1.22 as of, and that was as of 2022. So basically, total fertility along with marriage rates are declining over time. And people are having fewer and fewer children. So just like basic demography, in a modern kind of country where infant mortality is relatively low and people have long lifespans, roughly what's called a cohort replacement rate. So how many children per woman on average is required for the population to stay the same, right? So for your generation to replace itself is 2.1 children per woman. We're obviously well below that today. So left to our own devices, right, if we had no immigration in Canada, Canada's population, which today sits at like 38 million, I think, would roughly half by about the year 2055. Not 2050, 2125. Our population should roughly half. This decline in total fertility is really common in industrialized countries. We've seen it, all over the world, and basically every industrialized country is trending downwards in terms of its TFR. In very extreme cases, you get places like South Korea. South Korea's total fertility rate in 2022 was 0.77, which is obviously way below 2.1, which I think, if I remember the math, means by like 2085, South Korea's population will have halved if nothing changes. Japan's on track there. I think Japan's is about 8.89, and the US is slightly ahead of Canada, I think at 0.34. But all industrialized countries, right, we see a downward kind of total fertility rate. And I think, I was just reading this morning, they said global population will peak in about 2080. And by 2180, you'll have the same number of people on Earth as you had in 1946 by 2180, if the trends kind of continue. So we're going to go from a world population, so we went in 1946 from about a population of about 3 billion people. We're going to peak somewhere around 9.5 billion in 2080, and by 2180, we're going to go back down to roughly a global population of about 3 billion again, if all trends hold, and if everything kind of continues going the way it's going. So global population